I think it's very important to go back to history and pinpoint the fact that our education system in many African countries, Zimbabwe included, is not our own. In other words, it is a Eurocentric education system, a kind of education that seeks to extol the values, the culture of Europeans at the expense of the Africans themselves. If we were to go back in history, maybe if we are talking about Zimbabwe in the 1890, where the British company, the British South African company came to set up in Zimbabwe, we see even missionaries, we see people, different individuals or organizations such as the Jesuits that came teaching, which for me can be regarded as the first teachers. When you look at the coming in of colonialism, the first teachers, the first facilitators, the first trainers, the first lecturers of the African society, they taught us the values of Europe. They didn't teach us the values of an African person. Instead, they sought to demonize everything that is African. They sought to present African values, culture, beliefs, etc., as something that is primitive and outdated. Hence, they need to embrace European values at the expense of African values. That, I think, had a far-reaching effect on the African person, as it made us to lack the confidence that I mentioned when I was trying to define an African model of citizen, the pride in who we are, the confidence, and even I think it also sought to kill or destroy the creative aspect of an African, which I think is now responsible for changing who an African is today as a product of our education. So I think maybe just to put what I'm saying into perspective when it comes to history, I'm just trying to say that the reason why educators are failing to produce model African citizens, it is because of the education, the type of education system that we are having in many African countries. If you look at the Zimbabwean education system, it is rather modeled after the British system, education system, not the African or the Zimbabwean or the original Zimbabwean education system before the white men came and settled in Africa. So that in a way, we have educators that are a product of Western values, or a product of a Western education system. Teaching, teaching students in a manner that is prescribed by the same system, that Western system, hence influencing or determining the kind of education that they are passing to the learners. So at the end of the day, they're not producing this ideal African model citizen, because it seeks to produce someone that lacks confidence in who they are as Africans. It seeks to produce someone, or an outcome of someone that is rather acquainted more with a foreign environment rather than his own environment. He is separated from his own environment. Yet I think the role of education is supposed to be to make me, or to make an individual relate with his education better, hence being able to cope with the various challenges that individual faces on a daily basis. So I think it's a matter of an education system, the type of education system that we are having, that I think, in my view, is making it difficult for educators to produce model African citizens. Having said that, I then go on maybe to then talk about how I think educators can then produce this model African citizen. I think it is very imperative that we recraft our education curriculums, I am very encouraged with, for example, what happened in Zimbabwe. I think in 1991, where there was a submission by the Madzira Masanga Commission. They gave some very important recommendations on what can be done to the Zimbabwean education system. I like how they pointed out to the aspect of building our education system around Ubuntuism or Hunu, which I think is very important, because that in a way plays a critical role in instilling within the learner those vital values, culture, philosophies, ideologies that emanate from our culture as Africans. And I also think that besides recrafting our education curriculums, I think it's very important also to then carry out reviews as time goes on and refine it and improve it as per the challenges that we face as a country. I also think it's very important to pay particular attention to, that period, maybe 1 to 7 years, that period of childhood development, because that's where a child learns the things that they don't forget. So I think it's very important that we also look into, for example, Makresh that we have. What kind of education system do they have? What kind of arrangement do they have? How does one qualify as a creche? How does one, kindergarten? How does one qualify to come up with a kindergarten? Because right now I see there's a lot of development of this kind of kindergarten schools in different areas. I think in Zimbabwe also, but I think many of them, they are doing it for business rather than doing it to address the kind of problems that we face as Africans. So I think it's very important that government pays particular attention in terms of the procedures or passing or meeting establishing a particular criteria of passing those creches before they are established. And I also think that there's also need to ensure that our education is pro-creativity and entrepreneurial in a way, because I think it's a very important that we have an education system that fosters creativity and innovation among Africans as a way of addressing the different challenges that we face as an African person. And I also think that it is very important that government takes deliberate steps, or various institutions, education institutions and educators, that they take practical steps that are aimed at restoring pride in who we are as a people. And I also think it's very important that we pay attention to the aspect of language, which is our Shona language or our mother tongue when we are teaching. In as much as English has become a very important mode of communication or language of communication in the global village that we now live in, I think it's very important that we prioritize, or we extol our mother tongue as this is our tongue. Because remember, language is very important in terms of passing on values, virtues, beliefs, philosophies, ideas. So I think it's very important that we teach, if there are subjects that we can teach using our mother tongue, or for example, when you're talking about Zimbabwe, Shona or Ndebele, I think it's very important that we take that as being very important. Because I feel that in most countries, in most African countries, I think we sort of extol English more than at the detriment of our own language, which I think can have serious adverse effects or impacts on our quest to develop or produce this Africa model citizen. And I think it's also very important that as we teach, we also emphasize on stories or history telling that also restores the lost confidence that we require in this ideal modern citizen. So I think maybe for a start, I could end here as my submissions to the question, why are educators failing to produce model African citizens? Thank you, Kelvin.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I'd like to bring in Mr. Mandaza. Mr. Mandaza has been a language teacher for both O and A level at Anderson Adventist School. He's been a teacher for over 20 years. So I'll hand over the mic to Mr. Mandaza for his present to respond to the questions. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Kelvin, for having me. It's a wonderful privilege to be part of this group of panelists. Right, so are we really having a curriculum that addresses our African needs and can produce an African learner who can stand on the global platform and be counted? No, when we are talking about an education system that we can really appreciate as teachers and as students, we're talking about an education system that will produce someone who can stand on the globe anywhere, on any point of the globe and be counted. Somebody who can really be proud of who they are as an African. Somebody who brings a brand that is not European, that is not Chinese, something that can only be traced back to Africa, but yet be acceptable in terms of standards, by any standards across the globe. Now, when you are talking about a curriculum, you're talking about that body of knowledge that is supposed to be fed to learners so that they can be able to fulfill certain roles in the society. Now, when we look at the African society, we need doctors, we need engineers, we need teachers, we need nurses, we need so many professions, and those should be churned out of the school. Now, the school is a microcosm of the society. It is a representation of the society. Now, when a school is giving a curriculum that does not address the needs of the society, then the school has failed in its function. So what we need to look at as Africans and interrogate about our curriculum is this curriculum attending to our needs. We are importing cars, yet we have been probably independent for the past 40 years. Have we failed to produce people who can make cars, who can come up with a model of a car that is African? Have we been able to do that? Has our curriculum been able to do that? Those are the questions that we should ask ourselves. Why is it that we are importing almost everything, right down to toothpicks? It's a sign that there's something wrong with our education system. When you go back to the Africa of empires and kingdoms, the pre-colonial era, the pre-colonial era was an era that had its own education system, a unique education system that was based on equipping learners with skills that they could use in the society. Like our economy has always been agro-based, and as children were growing up in Zimbabwe, they were taught farming skills. And those farming skills are the ones that they would take into their adulthood and then implement and grow chibage and grow rapoko to feed their families and even to enhance trade. They'll be taught animal husbandry so that they could raise the goats, they could raise the cattle. And those skills, those life skills that they were taught were needed and were needed in their localities. Now, our education system, here is the fault. There are some things that we celebrate, which I think we should have a rethink about. You find a student doing 20 subjects at O level, and they get 20 A's, and they are praised in the newspaper, on TV, and they're heralded as great. But are those 20 subjects going to be useful in the child's life? The child wants to be a doctor, and probably he needs just physics. He needs chemistry, maths, and biology. Why is he doing 20 subjects? I think that is the other challenge that I have with this curriculum. We glorify people who are doing subjects more than they need. Well, imagine somebody doing 20 subjects at O level. That person is not going to have time to socialize with others. You're going to produce a genius who is socially maladjusted. So those are some of the things that we need to look at and say, and interrogate and say, is this really necessary? Why should somebody be doing 10 subjects at A level? Is it really necessary when they want to be a lawyer? And we know that you want to be, if you're going to be a lawyer, you just need your literature, your history, and probably your Shona. Also, I want to talk about the issue of language. Yes, the world has become a global village, and we are key players in the global village. And one of the key things that we need in this global village is communication. So it is important that we learn these foreign languages. I'll give you an example. The Chinese thought that Mandarin Chinese would become because of their numbers, about 2-point-something billion Chinese speak Mandarin Chinese, but Mandarin Chinese has not been able to dominate the world. And as a result, when the Chinese come here, they have to learn the English so that they can interact with us. They can interact with others across the globe. Right now, there's a market for English across the globe. So it is also important while we giving space for our languages, Shona, Kalanga, etc. While we're giving space in the curriculum to our language, we also need to learn these foreign languages so that when we go out there, we can stand up and be counted. We're able to communicate, but not downplaying the role of our languages, because language is the medium through which culture is transmitted. If we don't emphasize our languages in our curriculum, then it means that the cultural erosion is going to take place. And when cultural erosion takes place, we are going to produce learners that cannot be proud that they are Zimbabweans. We are producing learners that wish they were Western. And we are producing learners that would not want to tell the Zimbabwean story. So like the good doctor has said, languages are very important. If you go to German, they teach science in their own language. And as they teach science in their own language, the learners there are able to understand much better than they would if another language was being used, a foreign language was being used. Because when you're teaching a concept in a foreign language, for example, science, the student has two tasks. One, to master the foreign language, and two, to master the concepts. But if you teach in a language that they understand, let's say we're teaching biology in Shona, the student already understands the Shona, and therefore his task is made a whole lot easier. They can then understand the concepts as they are taught in Shona. So we need to promote our languages in this curriculum. We also need to have a curriculum that is pragmatic. I remember when we went to school back then, we did metalwork, we did woodwork, and that would equip us with the skills that we are even using today. So we need to go back to that curriculum that emphasizes on practical skills, such that when a student leaves school, if they can't find a job, actually we shouldn't be training students to be employees. We should train them in such a way that when they leave school, they're thinking about creating employment. And they can only create employment when they have the practical skills that are enshrined in woodwork, food and nutrition, garment making, etc. So those are the things that we need to go back to, not to emphasize so much on these theoretical areas that we've been looking at. Now, look at the Masanga Commission. it has been implemented, but to a very small extent. And because it has been implemented to a very small extent, we are still lagging behind. We are still holding on to the colonial education. But the Ziramasanga came, the commission came so that they would make recommendations that would help us, our own, that will help us to have our own brand of education. So it is my submission that yes, we are making strides to change our curriculum so that it suits our African environment, it suits our Zimbabwean environment, it suits even the global village. I'll give you an example. One thing that can actually shock people. I've been to Mutare Tears College, I've been to Solusi University, I've been to MSU, I'm a product of those schools. And I remember when we were at Mutare Tears College, we were supposed to do computers. I left Mutare Tears College having my certificate indicating that I did computers, but there was very little I knew about computers. I went to Solusi, passed my course in computers, but when it came to the practical aspect, it wasn't there. It wasn't there. I also went to MSU. We did a course in computers at master's level. But when I left, I remember most of the students that I was that were in my class could not operate computers. And these are the people that are going to teach our learners. Their certificates indicate that they've done computers, but the practical aspect is lacking. So, in short, we need to go back to the pragmatic aspect of learning. We need to go to the practicals, bring back the practicals, trim our curriculum so that students can only focus on the subjects that help them to fulfill the functions that they've chosen for themselves. If they want to be a doctor, let them focus on maths, chemistry, and biology, not to bring in other subjects and overburden them for no apparent reason. I think for a start, I will stop here and say that yes, our curriculum is slowly beginning to address our needs, but it's not yet there as long as we have not fully implemented the Ziramasanga Commission. Those are my submissions, Kelvin.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Mr. Mandaza. We're having some difficulty. Veronica is failing to log in, so we'll bring her in once she's been able to connect. Her network is pretty bad. Dr. David, we have not been able to, you won't be joining us tonight. So I would like to open up the floor to the audience for any questions and contributions to our two presentations before I bring in Prof into the session. So please use the hand reaction button and we'll unmute you if you wish to ask a question or contribute. Thank you. Hello.
Hello.
Jonathan.
Sure, thank you. Thank you to our wonderful panel of presenters. I did enjoy the presentations from both of you. The first presenter raised the point that in Zimbabwe, there was the Ziramasanga Commission. I also understand that in other countries like South Africa, there's also been an effort to change the curriculum to make it at least respond to the needs of the community, to reflect some of the aspirations of the society. Same applies to other countries, but obviously because we are different African countries, so our Africanness is different. So Thabo Mbeki makes it clear that his Africanness is both black blood and also Afrikaner blood. As he says in his book, I'm an African. So we understand that diversity. In any case, being African we are born Africans, but in every society, people are also given an opportunity to make a choice to become African. I think so we are more accommodating that perspective. After all, Africa is the mother of all continents in that case. So the question I wanted to raise in terms of the Masanga Commission is that we know that these commissions are good intentions, but we see that some of the results or some of their effects seem to show us the opposite results. So it's good to have these commissions, but what can be done about these commissions? I mean, we know that the Masanga Commission was a promise, but I don't think in Zimbabwe that promise was fully realized. That's my first question. So what can be done to make sure that some of these good intentions or promises are realized? At what point can they become mainstreamed in the policy? Are they just statements or something can be done? Then my second question is that, for instance, in Zimbabwe, we now see that our students are getting 20 A's. Recently, I have a case where a student got 15 points. So she had an A in maths, she had an A in biology, and she had an A in crop science. Crop science is a very specialist subject, something that someone would start at university level. So the question is, if we've had the commissions and we're starting to see some of these superfluous subjects appearing in students' life, and we're starting to see some of these superfluous achievements starting to anchor the foundation of the African youth, are we going to go very far? Because it seems we just assume that a subject is anything. You can have a subject called jumping up. You could have a subject called jumping down. You could have a subject called jumping sideways. But jumping is jumping. So jumping is one subject. But we are seeing that this jumping subject in Zimbabwe has been divided into many subjects. In South Africa, we see the same approach with mathematics, where some people can write standard maths, some people can write some advanced maths, some people can also write some maths illiterates, but they are also nonetheless have done mathematics.
Hello, Comfort.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Thank you to the presenter. So I largely agree to what they were saying, but just a question. So I see that the way our education is structured is such that it is broad at the bottom, which allows students to do many subjects, 10 subjects or so, 8 subjects, but eventually specialize as you go up. And in that case, a student will have more options, especially after they finish O-level or A-level. They can be many things. They can be a teacher, they can be a nurse, they can be a carpenter, they can qualify to go to college or university and become a professional. So what is bad with that?
Thank you, Comfort. We've got Brian on the line.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you so much to the panelists for raising such important points and thought-provoking nuggets. I understand that you are educators yourselves. And it is very interesting that just like most students we have heard on this platform before, you are submitting that by and large, the type of the education system that we have in our country is largely Western and kind of irrelevant. and not really fit for purpose to prepare students for African realities. You pretty know that the curriculum is failing to produce those model African citizens that are prepared for such African realities, right? Then my first question is, as teachers yourselves, what are you doing to prepare students for these realities? What are you doing with your curriculums? And what are you doing in your teaching methods and probably teaching systems to prepare those students for the realities that we have in our African continent? Second question, all of you also as educators, just like as students pointed out before, you seem to blame the education system and say that it is largely Western. And also it does not take into consideration the social values, our ethos and African philosophies. If we blame the education system for all that, what then is the role of the society? Because we cannot, you as teachers, you cannot teach children everything in school. Some of the values or some of the things ought to be taught at home. But then, for example, if you take the responsibility to say, yes, the education system is kind of irrelevant to prepare students for African realities, because it is not taking into consideration these values, what then is the role of the society? I think that just like in any part of the world, the education system does not cover everything. Even if you go to the Western world, or if you go to probably the Asians, the society is a fundamental institution that plays a fundamental role in nurturing kids. And that is the same as in our African continent. The society should be the basis of the education system. And we cannot really blame the education system for failing to produce those students that are really relevant for the African realities. So my question is, why are you kind of blaming yourself to say the education system is not enough when we know that the society is there to complement your role? I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kombora. We've got two more questions. We've got Mr. Timothy and Isaac. So I'm going to go with Mr. Timothy first, and then to Isaac. Hello, advocate.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have two questions. The first one is we'll go to both the presenters. Thank you very much for wonderful presentations. The question is on the model African citizen. I'm asking any of you just to provide me with an example of anyone whom you think is the model African citizen. And I think it will help us a lot to see whether or not the educators are failing to produce a model Africa. Then the second issue goes to Mr. Mandaza. Mr. Mandaza, you spoke about some students having 20 subjects and some students A-level actually studying about 10 subjects. What would you say if I say I'm studying those subjects maybe to get a scholarship? Yes, thank you very much for the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Timothy. Next, we've got Isaac. No, Isaac?
Yes, hello.
Yes, we can hear you. How are you, sir?
Good. My point is, why are we blaming the system instead of blaming the teachers who literally are not innovative enough to bring a change? Because we see that the educational system, it gives a platform where we have co-curriculum activities, but then they do not mold the students to become what they want from as in to so that the students fit with the African context that we are talking about. So literally blaming the system, I don't think it's finding a solution. Yet we have teachers who are supposed to be innovative, teachers who are supposed to have something to offer on the table, and they happen not to be capable of doing that. So the teachers themselves, they need to be equipped, they need to be parted with knowledge on how they can be innovative so that they can produce students who are fit to become problem solvers within Africa. So blaming the system, it's not adequate enough. We need to look where the problem is. And apparently the problem is with the teachers. They're not imparted with adequate knowledge so that they produce students who are fit for the African context that we are discussing here. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Magwenzi. I'm going to hand it over to the panel. Can we please get a response from Mr. Mandaza and Mr. Chikwasa?
All right, thank you so much for the questions. I would want to respond to a few of them, then my colleague can then respond to the others. Well, I'll start with one. I'll just, what is bad with a student doing 20 subjects? Now, 20 subjects, that means this child is not specializing in any area. And it's a sign that the student could be lacking career guidance. And one of the problems with our education system is that we begin career guidance. Maybe we do career guidance for people when they're already in Form 4 and they've already chosen subjects. Career guidance should start even from ECD, such that when a child is still at ECD, they know what they are aiming for, what they are gunning for. I'll give you an example. We have soccer academies that are churning out talent for the European market. Those students have identified their purpose in life. They've realized, I am a soccer player, I am a gifted Aubumayang, and I am going to play soccer. So I am going to concentrate on getting soccer skills that will make me be able to play for Arsenal one day. So it's important that students specialize. And when a student is doing 20 subjects, they don't have much time to do other things that they are supposed to be doing in school. Like, for example, socialize with others, which is a very important function of the school. If there is no social time for the child, we are going to have someone who is socially maladjusted, very intelligent, but socially maladjusted. So I believe that students should specialize so that they become masters of a certain area, not to have too many areas that they're concentrating on. And in the end, they end up being confused. They don't know whether they're supposed to pursue arts or sciences or whatever field that they're supposed to follow. Then the other thing that is awfully wrong with our system, the Nziramasanga Commission is there, but education needs funding. Education is not cheap. We have made our education cheap. We've made it affordable. When you, for everyone, I know I'm going to be very controversial on this one. Once we make education affordable for everyone, then that means there are some things that schools cannot be able to provide for learners. For example, you have a school probably being forced to charge fees that is probably 10,000. That school then cannot buy computers. That school then cannot buy chemicals for students to do their science practicals. And therefore, the students are deprived of the learning that they are supposed to get, because we've made education cheap, maybe for populistic reasons, or maybe with a view to make education available for everyone. But then let's look at our national budget. How much is being availed for education? Is it enough? So we need to fund our education so that such recommendations like the Nziramasanga Commission can be fully implemented without money being channeled into education. Then we can talk about any commission, Nziramasanga, even the Chinotimba Commission coming through. But if there's no money to fund those, then there's nothing much that we can do. Somebody asked, do we have a model African citizen? Yes, we have a model African citizen that are out there. I'll give you an example. Who is a model African citizen? We have people that are in sports, people that are playing sport abroad. We have our own Tinoka Dewe. That's a model African citizen. He goes out there in France, plays soccer, and he stands out for his team. We have our own Nakamba. That's a model African citizen. Where did he come from? He came from a soccer academy. So our view of education should not just be about academics. We should also look at the sports. We should also look at other areas that are not academic. And as long as we keep focusing on academics, we are depriving our students who are talented in other areas a chance to showcase the skills that they have, and therefore thwarting their potential. Where did Abumayen came from? He came from the soccer academy. And that's what schools should look at. We also want to look at the teachers being blamed. Yes, partly teachers are to blame. We can take the flaking there as teachers because sometimes we are not creative enough. But we work within a system where probably we are restricted and you can't work beyond your restrictions. For example, I work in a school that does not really see the importance of sports. And there's an overemphasis on academics. So there's not much that I can do for the child that I've identified to be having a soccer or a hockey talent as a teacher, because I'm working within a system. I want to believe that those who design the curriculum should not just go to Victoria Falls as a group of 10 people and design a curriculum. There should be wide consultation. They should consult even the village headmen about what they want learners to learn. And when there's wider consultation, then we'll be able to cover all the corners of the society so that our education becomes relevant. There was also another question on, I think somebody talked about the ideologies when somebody was talking about Ubuntu, the African Renaissance from Thabo Mbeki. We also need to interrogate this. What is the ideology behind our education? If our education has become more capitalist, what kind of people are we producing? So there is a need to identify the pillars of education, and that is the ideology behind. And the ideology behind should be African in nature. Like, for example, Ubuntu. When we talk about Ubuntu, that means every teacher is going to teach, whether they're going to teach maths, and they're going to teach Shona, they're going to teach Swahili. They're also going to teach African values to make sure that the ideology of Ubuntu is exposed to to every child. I think those are some of the things that I would want to respond to. My co-presenter, I'm sure, is other areas that he feels that you would want to respond to. If there are any, I will come back if there's still time. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Mandaza.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, David, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Oh, okay, a very big thank you to Mr. Mandaza for doing the larger part of the task to respond to the questions. But maybe what I could just maybe add on is the aspect of operating within a system, which I think he rightly pointed out. Mr. Isaac Magwenzi raised a very important question about the role of the educators ourselves. Are we also not to blame instead of just blaming the system? So yes, I would like to agree with him, like what Mr. Mandaza did. The educators indeed have a vital role to play, because in as much as you operate within a system, I think you also have room. It depends with the system that you have. Is it an open system? Is it a strict system? Or it's a system that allows you to flex in terms of how you pass on knowledge or impact knowledge to the learners? But we must not forget the aspect of the system. The system is very important. It must be taken into consideration. What kind of a system is there? It's like any organization or any entity that you could be part of. There is a system, and an individual, you as the educator, as an individual, you're supposed to align yourself with that system. So at the end of the day, it goes back to the system. So we must not negate the importance of the system. The system is very important. And then there's somebody who asked the question about if whether or not there's a problem to do with specialization. I think he pointed out the fact that you start off maybe from a broad foundation, and as you go, you begin to specialize as you go. And he asked, I think the question that he asked was, is there a problem with that? To respond to that question, I would like to believe that there is nothing wrong with specialization, but I think there is something fundamentally wrong with maybe starting from, doing things from a tender age. Whereas maybe sometimes I think it's vital to quickly or at an early stage to identify the purpose of a particular learner or a particular student, so that at least the system is quick to identify whether this person is cut out to be, for example, a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, or maybe even a sportsman. I think it helps in terms of harnessing the potentials that that person has, and particularly focus and specialize on that thing. And I think specialization will produce for you someone that is more than excellent, instead of maybe sometimes wasting time doing a lot of things that I think maybe at the end of the day will be irrelevant in the later stage or in the ultimate career of that particular learner. So I think specialization is very important, and there's nothing wrong with specialization. In fact, we need to specialize more on the basis of quickly identifying or early identifying who that person is cut out to be. Then I would like to talk about the issue of the Nziramasanga Commission, the submissions that they made, the recommendations that they made. I think it goes beyond just education. I think it also speaks to certain factors that are outside the education system, because in as much as there's an education system, we must understand that it doesn't operate in a vacuum. It is affected by other factors, the issues to do with the economy, the issues to do with the politics, many other issues. I like the fact that Mr. Mandaza also pointed the aspect of funding. There is need to fund some of these recommendations. And in as much as the government is also has also been doing quite well, we must, if you really look into the Nziramasanga Commission implementation, like the recommendations, you realize that the government from then, of course, it was later on I think the government did try to incorporate some of the recommendations that were made. So I think something was done, but we must also understand that it also depends upon the political will of those that are that have the keys to take this issue seriously and implement it, with the kind of zest as it deserves. So I think it's a number of issues that are also important to take into consideration. I also wanted to talk about the issue of what? The issue about the teacher. Okay, I think I've already addressed that, the issue about the teacher himself. Then I also want to talk about the issue of an ideal citizen, an ideal African, a model African citizen that we can pinpoint to. I like Mr. Mandaza pointed out to some African individuals, sportsmen, basically maybe in Europe, that are representing the country well. But I also want to pinpoint to outside Zimbabwe, of course. We had an individual, for example, such as Thomas Sangara of Burkina Faso. He was a kind of individual, a kind of African that I think young people can learn from and can aspire to become. He stood, he had value, he really understood what it means to be African. He really understood what it is to have pride in being African, in having pride in African products, in having pride in who he was, and how it was important that, as an individual, he takes pride in his values, in his culture as an African. So I think he's somebody that we can learn from. Of course, he's long gone, but I think looking into him as an individual can also help us to appreciate what it means to become this kind of African. So I think, having said this, I think I'll stop here for now. Thank you so much, Calvin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chikwaza. We've got a question here from Marita. And then after Marita, we're going to take it over to Professor Mandi for him to close out the session.
Thank you, Kevin. I'd like to thank all of the presenters for the brilliant presentations. But I have a question. I've heard a lot about the shortcomings of our current system, but I'd also like to hear about the positives of our current system and what we need to strengthen. For example, I'll give an example of myself. I think my interest in who I am as an African and how to nurture and to get to know more about my being an African and my history, my language, pride in just being an African, I think started earlier on. I didn't realize it at the time, but it started earlier on when I was studying literature, when we're doing African literature and our analysis and interrogation of the different themes that came up in the African books. So I think there's also need to interrogate the strengths that are already there and how they can be enhanced. Thanks.
Marita, I think we've got a final question from Munya. Munya, we have to go to Prof. Thank you.
Hello. I also had a question. Hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, Munya. Please proceed.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I just want to say thank you to the participants and also the panel and Prof. Mandi Rukuni for giving us this great opportunity to interact. So now my question now is basically based on the education system that we have. From a young age, we learn in our African schools, our local schools and everything, primary up until secondary, etc. And then after that, what we want to do is we want to supplement that education in foreign universities, for example, to England, USA, etc. So now what I want to know is that how then can we meet these standards that are necessary for us to produce these African model students if it is not 100% in Africa as well? Thank you. That's my question.
Thank you, Munya, for that. I want to thank all the panelists and everybody who has contributed tonight. We're going to take it over to Prof. Mandi for him to give us the closeout and final thoughts. Over to you, Prof.
Oh, thank you so much, moderator. I'd like to really thank Dr. David Chikwaza and Dr. Mandaza for their presentations, and all those who contributed with comments and questions. Dr. Jonathan Murindani, as usual, Brian, Isaac, and others. You see, my thinking is that acceptance of a fault or a disease is 50% towards recovery. So when I heard our educators, and these are our top educators, I mean, those ones who are speaking, say, yes, we do have a problem. That already says to me, we are on our path towards recovery. I'm an educator myself. I'm now a retired professor. I was at it for more than 40 years. And I know I'm part of the problem, because for most of the time, we're just reinforcing what it is that we're trying to fight against. So I would say that I would probably sum up part of my diagnosis based on the good presentations we've got, is to say we're still suffering very much from path dependency. I mean, we go down a path, and even if you realize this is not quite the right path, even when you realize you're not going anywhere, but you're still afraid to stop and go backwards, you're still afraid to go sideways, because that's the only path you know. You don't have the courage or confidence to chart a new path. That's where we are in Africa. And what's happening right now, including these conversations we're having, is the indication that that's about to change. The fact that we're accepting and talking about it means that very, very soon, we are going to have the courage to do something very different to how we are going on with education. So I am very, very much encouraged. And whichever way you may want to look at it, I think COVID-19 gave Africa a jump start. I mean, COVID-19, in spite of all its debilitating qualities, did something for Africa to demonstrate that there is no civilization anywhere in the world which will survive nature at its best. Because nature at its best has no perpetual rules. In life, there are no absolute truth on anything. The truth will change. The truth will migrate. The reason why we need an outstanding educational system is because the truth never stays in the same place. So the industrial approach to education makes it sound like the truth is permanent. So you just have to regurgitate, copy, and paste. No, the truth is relative. Truth is migratory. Truth sometimes is even elusive. What you see is not what it is. So this is why the educational system really has to be up there. I know that Brian brought a very interesting point about, but society at large is to blame. we can't expect a society to have an educational system which produces a model African when in actual fact society is silent or is not able to impact on the type of educational system. That's a good point. But as somebody whispered to me as I was listening to you, Bernard, it's a vicious circle. Society is also kind of frozen in a situation where society doesn't really know anymore what a model citizen is. As I've explained in one of the sessions before, when we're still talking about colonial trauma and colonial mindsets that have to change. I remember vividly saying as one of my closing comments, we as Africans have to actually celebrate the fact that colonialism ultimately failed to crush Africa and to crush African culture and identity. It really tried. And we have a kind of a damaged society, but it failed to take us into the grave. The resilience of African culture and sense of identity is so powerful that it's now rising up again. It's a matter of time. And I said, I think in my last talk, that the most important thing that African worldviews bring to the world and should impact on educational systems, not just in Africa, but the world over, is the fact that Africans have some unique values and qualities which have failed to find at the same level in any other society. The first is that Africans are the happiest people in the world, in spite of all the challenges we have. You won't find anywhere else in the world where people will be, quote unquote, materially poor, but still be spiritually so happy. That quality is the highest spiritual quality in any civilization. And that's why when we say Africanness or Uhunu, Ubuntu, Udugu, it can translate to the godness in one. It is actually that level of understanding of how to enjoy life, even if everything else does not appear to be going well. What that does, once we reorient ourselves towards awakening the sleeping giant that Africa is then to realize that the educational system doesn't need to do incredible things that industrial forms of education have tried to do, but rather to prepare young Africans for life as it is. Life is a game. There's no good and bad. In African worldviews, no one is relegated to remember, before colonialism, there was no capital punishment. I mean, people only died when we went to war or through natural causes. Why? Because there's happy people and unhappy people. That's all there is. Good and bad is just a value judgment which does not go very far, meaning that the educational system needs to prepare our youngsters from early child care to the realization that it's more important to understand and believe that in your identity, it's important to understand how to belong, how to connect with others, how to work with others, how to think with others, how to do with others, individually and with others. It is a type of education that has to be informed by the realization that ultimately we are human beings, and what separates us from human beings is the ability to vision a higher society, higher values, The second thing that distinguishes African worldviews from the rest is that, you know, Africans are the only civilization which never found it necessary to go and colonize anyone else. Or even today, I mean, not many Africans even dream about, I want to go and drill for oil in London or in Amsterdam. You know, Africans always knew that wherever you are, you can unravel and surface many other worlds. You don't actually need to go and drill for oil in Delhi or in Tokyo. But you see, what Western civilization has done, it has brought some great things in terms of technology, entrepreneurship, but it's also brought some really weird things like individualism and greed, actually glorifying greed. So what that has done for Africans is to throw that kind of confusion into our understanding of what life is and how we live it. So who is a model African? I think we got some good responses to that. At the end of the day, I think that when you dig deep down in most Africans, you find that they still actually have a deeper understanding of life. They're just lacking confidence of actually flashing it out in the public. Most Africans, when you dig into them, they understand. They really do understand that I am because we are. I mean, there's no world if we all don't eventually cooperate at some other level. So that value of Africans having a limit to which they believe that you need to enslave anybody else in the world or go and overrun some other worlds over there. It's an important indication of the kinds of people we need to prepare. So I would say that thank you so much to the panelists. I don't know how much I can thank you for really bringing a very high level of intellectual thought into this whole process, and that what I hope to do next week is to give a talk on how I see the role of tertiary education and universities in the advancement of African society. Because although I argued 3 weeks ago that early childcare education is more important than university education, I will be arguing, almost contradicting myself, but actually not too much. I'll be arguing that actually the university educational system now has an important role to correct that, to make it clear that we can research into anything, we can dig into anything, and we can look at structural faults. We don't analyze issues just at event and trend level. We analyze issues at structure, design, structural level, and we go all the way up to understanding what mental models created this animal that we have inherited of a colonial educational system, and the desire of an African future. In my first session in this whole entire DWP series, I argued that part of our weakness today as we try to transform Africa back to the great civilization that we were was that we are still not able to articulate what kind of society we want to create again. We are still kind of just assuming that it will just happen automatically. Are we trying to be Americans or Germans or Brits? Are we trying to be Chinese or like Indians? Now, you see, and as I've said before, we will never beat the Chinese at being Chinese. We can never beat the Americans at being Americans, but we can beat any people in the world at being African, because we can be superbly African and do it at such a high level in all spheres, from science to basic, human life. And I think that's what our educational system has to produce. Thank you so much. Over
Thank you
to
very
you.
much, Prof. Thank you very much, Prof, for the good final thoughts. I want to thank the panelists that came on board. I want to apologize for the other two that could not make it into our session. Please, can you subscribe to all of our channels? You can catch us next week, same time. We're going to continue with the education themed series, and we can continue this conversation in our WhatsApp group and our Telegram platforms as well. Thank you very much, and good night.